Let's get real. The holidays are coming very soon, and that means big meals and bigger regret when you look in the mirror and think about how much weight you've gained from the meal you just had last night. And if I wanted to lose 10 kilo fast after the holiday period, I'd do this one thing without drugs, supplements, or risking my health. And this one thing looks really simple, and yet people still mess it up. So I'm going to share with you some minor points to make sure you can lose fat fast. When it comes to fat loss, there's really only 3 ways. I can train 80% and try to diet 20%. This is a little bit like trying to outrun your diet. I can train 50%, diet 50%, which is the most common approach, or I can diet at 80% and train about 20%. This last approach is often mistakenly thought of as crash dieting. Provided you've got a few things in place, you'll see it's not a crash diet at all. Because a crash diet would be something done on little to no activity, because there's little to no food, meaning you can't fuel that activity. And because there's little fuel and little activity, it pretty much always results in muscle loss, which is the exact opposite thing we want to happen while dieting. But there are definite benefits to being in the diet phase for the shortest possible period of time. The most important reason is simply that you won't need to rely on willpower for an extended period of time. Most people struggle to diet hard for more than a couple of weeks, and that's because the longer you're on a diet for, and the more restricted it is, the stronger the hunger signals become, and the more likely you are to fall off your diet. I've seen this time and time again in new clients, like a client I met recently called Brian. He'd been in this low food, trying to maintain high activity style of dieting for a long period of time. Each time he'd try and fail, he'd actually lose some muscle along the way, and that actually made fat loss even harder when he got going again. And when we swapped to this short, intense style of dieting that still allowed him to strength train, he held onto that muscle and made losing fat even easier. So how do you make sure you keep muscle while dieting very strictly? There are really only 2 factors. The first is making sure to continue strength training during the dieting phase, and the second is making sure you eat adequate protein. But the strength training is really difficult when you're low on fuel. And that's the first mistake that people make, like Brian did, of trying to have endurance circuit style workouts during these diet phases, thinking they need to burn as many calories as possible. You need to train in a way that encourages that muscle to stick around. To preserve muscle, we need to do one of 2 things in training. The first is that we want to train in the 5 to 6 rep range, because that makes sure that the big muscle fibers are engaged when we train. The second is that you can use lighter weights, but you must train to failure, because when you approach failure, you engage those big muscle units again. Both of these strategies can work, however my preference is for the low rep sets. And that's because we don't need much carbohydrate for fuel while training for very short periods of time. Once sets go past about 30 seconds in length, you're going to start to need more and more carbohydrate, which is a real problem while dieting strictly. And there's also a slight problem when it comes to training to failure. Most people won't push themselves anywhere near hard enough, and there are other exercises, like the bench press, where training to failure on your own is outright dangerous. So my preference is actually to combine the 2 methods together. Train one exercise heavy in the 5 to 6 rep range, and then move on to isolation exercises that are much safer when you do actually train to failure. And because we're not trying to gain muscle while dieting, the total amount of work can be very, very small. For chest as an example, I might do 3 sets of 4 to 6 reps of bench press, training quite heavy, and then move on to a single set of 2 different isolation exercises like flies or chest press. 5 total sets, and I'm done. And because overall volume is so low, that means I can probably get away with doing a total of 15 sets for my upper body in a single workout, and something like 10 sets or so for my lower body in another workout. Finish the week with a whole body training session just using your 3 main lifts for push, pull, and lower body, which is going to be 9 total sets, and go home for the day. And I know people will look at this and think they should do more. But remember, we're on the 80% diet, 20% training plan version of dieting. If you want to do more, then you need to eat more food so you can sustain more training. This minimalistic approach is often met with initial pushback from clients. But the reality is we're not trying to build fitness or muscle here, only preserve what we have. We need to make sure the workouts are brief enough that we don't dig into what muscle we have, while also not digging into what little recovery ability we have from how little fuel we're taking on. Now you understand how little you need to train, we should probably talk about how little you should be eating. The technical term for this style of diet is called a protein-sparing modified fast, which you'll often see shortened to PSMF. What this means is that we're on an extended fast, except for protein. so pretty much your entire intake is based on protein. I know this sounds extreme and like it can't be healthy, but there's plenty of research to show that it's perfectly fine for your body, provided it is for a short period of time. Normal protein intakes for athletic individuals range from 0.7 gram per pound up to 1 gram per pound of protein intake. For this style of diet, I've seen recommendations as high as 2 grams per pound of body weight, which is a tremendous amount of protein to take in. For me, for example, that would mean 360 grams of protein per day to take in, or well over a kilo of meat that I need to eat per day. That's just a tremendous amount of food to have to take in. Personally, I've seen great results for both myself and clients in the 1.2 to 1.5 grams per pound of protein per body weight. The most important distinction we need to make at this point is to make sure you understand the difference between this diet and a keto diet. This plan is not a keto diet plan. A ketogenic diet will be okay with you choosing high-fat sources of protein like Scotch fillet steak or chicken thigh. This plan is seeking to reduce calorie intake by as much as possible, and that means our protein sources are going to be low-fat like chicken breast, turkey breast, and egg whites over whole eggs. Some people will try to use protein powders to try to help their protein intake. I'll just caution you that a lot of cheaper protein powders have got a degree of straight milk powder put in them, which always means there's a degree of bloat and water retention due to the dairy in the protein source. I know this looks like it might be difficult to manage, but the reverse is actually true. It's incredibly simple. Most of my clients report how quick shopping is and how fast meal prep is because instead of the normal 3-2-1 diet suggestions I make, this limits you to one choice. It's a protein source and a few vegetables, and that's it for every single meal. As an example of how powerful this is for body composition, a famous pro bodybuilder, Kevin Levrone, ate exactly this way in preparation for his shows, eating only fish and broccoli for many meals before his shows. So we've covered the basics of protein. What else do you get to eat? Like I said, this diet is super simple and really focused on the protein, but there are 2 other things to add to your diet, and the first is some fibrous vegetables. You're looking for a selection of fibrous vegetables such as green beans, broccoli, cauliflower, capsicums or peppers, cucumbers, eggplant, and zucchini. While it can be difficult to eat so many vegetables that you wreck your diet, it is possible, so you do need to limit the portion sizes to an extent. You want to make sure that you eat enough that you have no trouble pooping, but not so much that you accidentally add an extra few hundred calories per day and slow down the effectiveness of the diet. And the only other thing to add in is fish oil. If you look on the side of the label of a fish oil bottle, you'll see there are 2 compounds listed, EPA and DHA, and you want to combine 2,000 milligrams per day of both of these together, which could be as many as 10 low-quality fish oil capsules or 2 really good quality ones. In a weird way, clients who follow this diet approach tell me they have much less anxiety over their food choices because they've only got one. There's a lot less stress involved in making one meal that's the same for every single meal versus trying to come up with 28 different meals every single week. Now, if you've listened to this video and would rather be in the 50% diet, 50% training side, then I made this video here with the most up-to-date training methods so you can accelerate fat loss while eating a little bit more food.